Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of Blog Business Success here on Blog Talk Radio. And I'm your host, Wayne Hurlbert. And tonight our guest is Trevor Blake. And he's a successful entrepreneur, he's a life coach, and he's the author of the insightful and empowering book, 3 Simple Steps, A Map to Success in Business and Life. And Trevor Blake describes how to regain control of your thoughts and your life to achieve a life of purpose. And Trevor Blake provides the roadmap to removing negative thoughts from your brain and replacing them with empowering ideas that create positive actions toward your life goals. And Trevor presents the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience that demonstrate how the brain works and behaves under both negative and positive thoughts and ideas. And Trevor shares his 3 simple steps for regaining control of those thoughts and of your destiny. And of course, as I mentioned, Trevor Blake is the author of 3 Simple Steps, and he's the founder and CEO of QOL Medical, a specialty pharmaceutical company he started in 2002 with just a few $1,000s and sold in 2010 for over $100 million. And in 2006, he created ANU, a unique not-for-profit organization dedicated to developing low side effect cancer drugs. And before that, Trevor was a serial entrepreneur and has put his 3 simple steps to use in his own life. Welcome to our show, Trevor.
Thank you, Wayne, and appreciate the introduction. It was comprehensive.
Well, I want to make sure we covered all of the exciting bases in your life here. And what was the background to writing this book, 3 Simple Steps?
Well, I've wanted to write it for quite some time because I've been teaching these steps to, well, probably formally and informally, to several thousand people over the years. But one, I didn't have the time because I was running my companies, and 2, it's a self-help book in some ways, but I'm not a big fan of self-help books myself because so many of them, even the most famous ones, are written by people whose only taste of success is the fact that their book has suddenly caught on. They never actually achieved success before they became a good writer or a successful writer. So I wanted to wait until I, felt I had the credibility to stand up and say, look, the American dream is alive and well and, in fact, never more attainable, and I'm living proof of that because I come from very humble beginnings with no advantages except for these 3 simple steps. So that's why the book is out there now.
As you mentioned, there are many books written on the topic of personal development and gaining control of your life. How is this book different from the ones that you mentioned where the individuals were mostly successful at selling books but not at much about anything else?
Well, it comes from the fact that it's an authentic description of how I got out of my own personal version of quicksand. I grew up very poor. My family were evicted 3 times before I was 7, and this is back in 1967. That was a time when you could pack all of your household belongings into the back of a truck and escape your creditors by riding out to the hills, and that's basically what my parents did. We ended up in a very rural, perhaps backward is too strong a word, but it is certainly lost in time, and lived out my teenage years in a derelict farmhouse. My father out of work that whole time, and my mother was diagnosed with cancer when I was 8 years old, and lived through the next 14 years of debilitating treatments and pain. And at the end of that, I could see that I was going to turn out like my father. I had the same characteristics, and I was in a place where there were no jobs, and where people just generally, took welfare money and smoked cigarettes and watched TV, and that's basically what people did. And I wanted a way out. So I actually became addicted to reading the autobiographies of self-made men and women, and it's in those amazing stories of the Henry Fords, the Carnegies, Samuel Colts, Madam C.J. Walker, where I realized that they started from even more humble beginnings than I found myself in, but they'd found a way out. And I saw that they had these sort of common behaviors, these common attitudes, and I was young enough and naive enough to think, well, if it worked for them, why wouldn't it work for me? And so I started to apply it in my own life. And, I used it to get out of poverty. Then money was never of any interest to me at that age. But what I did want to do was travel. So I used the 3 simple steps to find a way to travel around the world, and I got to visit 56 countries. I lived and worked on a mid-six-figure salary in several of them, and that's by far the best way to travel. And then a funny thing happened when I got to 40 years old. I went to bed on the night of my 39th year feeling immortal and fit, and then I woke up the morning of my 40th looking 4 months pregnant and feeling vulnerable. So at that point, I decided to apply the 3 simple steps to my financial independence, and that's when I started my first company.
As you mentioned, you arrived yourself from a humble background. Why are there so many people struggling and not finding success or happiness in their own lives?
Well, I think it goes back to what you said up the top there, where you mentioned positive thinking. I personally think positive thinking is an illusion. In fact, it's an impossibility because of the way the brain works. So most people don't understand that they're able to control how they react to their own thoughts, but also that their own thoughts are instantaneous. They work at the speed of light. So if you find yourself in a situation you don't like, or you see something that doesn't appeal to you, your thoughts tend to be immediately negative and also hardwired. And we now know that the brain works more like a muscle than we ever realized. So the more you expose it to these negative behaviors, the more you start to mimic it. And it's a little bit like quicksand. The harder you struggle, the deeper you sink. And so what you have to realize is, first of all, become self-aware of that process of the way the brain works. And then secondly, understand that the one thing you can control is not your thoughts, but how you react to the thoughts you just had. And if you choose to react differently, then you get better outcomes. And so I saw this in the lives of these great self-made men and women, and I applied it in my own life. First of all, in really simple ways. For instance, someone might say to you, you might be feeling as fit as a fiddle, and someone might walk in and say, oh my goodness, you look tired today. Well, when that happens to most people, they see a reflection of themselves in the mirror in their mind, and they see themselves looking sallow and bags under the eyes, and sure enough, an hour later, they feel really weary. And so you change the reaction to those thoughts. You would say something like, I could use more energy right now. And so I learned to do that in very simple situations when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And then that prepared me to be able to do the same thing in bigger situations. So when I had a great idea for a company and everybody around me said, don't be crazy, you're not capable of doing that, I was able to react to my thoughts that came from their responses, and I reacted in a different way, and it made me sort of drive myself to overcoming other people's limited opinion of me, and that's the secret. It's not what we think that matters, it's how we react to what we think.
Is there some science and some breakthroughs in the field of neuroscience to back up and support the idea of not listening to negative people and providing yourself with a more positive outlook?
Yeah, and we live in a great era when it's possible to use technology to map what happens inside the brain when it's exposed to various stimuli. So when it's exposed to sensationalist news headlines as opposed to when it's exposed to more positive or affirmative words, if you like. And what we see is that the more that the brain is exposed to one thing or another, the more there's 100 billion neurons, and they make more connections than all the cell phones in the world on any given day. And we have over 70,000 thoughts on any given day. And the brain seeks out something that makes it feel some kind of stimuli or some kind of response to stimuli. And it could be positive or it could be negative. For most of us, unfortunately, we spend most of our lives being exposed to somewhat negative behaviors and negative images and negative noise. And so the brain hardwires to that. And this is work that's been done, it's award-winning work that's been done by Stanford and Harvard. And the good news of all that, bad news is that your brain does hardwire. And if you're not aware of that and you don't make efforts to break the connection, then it's a downward spiral. The good news is that the solution is really simple. If you break the connection, not only do you sort of stop the damage, but you can undo the physical damage that's been done by that exposure to negativity. And there's a Professor Sapolsky in California who has shown that if you expose the brain to 30 minutes of negativity a day, it actually causes brain cell death. And it peels back the neurons in the hippocampus, which is a critical area of the brain that we need to exist in a constantly changing environment. So it's actually, I think of it like more like passive smoking. My father was a chain smoker, and so the only way I could sort of protect my lungs when I was a kid was to get out of his way, to get out of the house and go out in the fresh air. And I think of negativity like that. The only way to stop the downward spiral is to break that connection. So you have to put distance between yourself and your daily dose of sensationalist news, or the complainers around you in the workplace, or your family who are always criticizing or telling you you're not good enough. You have to break that connection. It can be as simple as excusing yourself for 5 minutes and just going outside and getting some fresh air.
As you mentioned, one of the most frequently encountered individuals in the workplace is that person who complains about everything in their life and their job and their home and just about anything that can be imagined. They've got a complaint about it, and usually when old Joe, the complainer, walks into the office as well, it seems like there's a real cloud of gloom even descends on the entire office when they arrive. How could you work with someone like that?
Well, we often get stuck with people like that. That's the challenge, and the more you get stuck with them, the more you have the propensity to become like that yourself. And the classic example I have is my mother-in-law. I've known her for 30 years, and we got on great, so this isn't a mother-in-law joke. But she lives in a place where everybody complains about their backache and the fact that the youth today show no respect and their pension doesn't go far enough. And then when she comes to visit us, she stays with us in the summer for 6 to 8 weeks. When she walks through the front door, the first thing she says is, "I'm sick to death of people always complaining." And we always burst out, my wife and I burst out laughing, because she's now complaining about the complainers and doesn't understand that she also has got into that spiral of complaining all the time. And we have learned, my wife and I have learned, not to challenge that and not to try and correct it, not to try and stop it, just to completely ignore it, change the conversation to something more positive. And an amazing thing happens. It takes a while, but after about 10 days to 2 weeks, it's almost as if aliens came into our house the night before and they took out this angry old woman and they replaced her with everybody's favorite white-haired granny. The transformation is remarkable, but it's because of that breaking in the connection. And unfortunately, in the workplace, you get trapped with those people, and it is energy zapping. I mean, they're like energy vampires, and you can get caught in that. And when that happens, you've got to break free. You've got to treat it like passive smoking. Get out of that toxic environment.
Yes, very often after a session with the complaining individual, a person's energy level, when they were all excited to get started on a project, after a discussion, even 2 minutes with that individual, you feel like you've already put in 3 days of work with no sleep.
Yeah, it's exhausting. I mean, I've in my regular career, when I look back on my regular career, I reckon I spent 75% of my time sitting in a meeting room talking about nothing positive, not talking about how we make more profit or how we increase revenue or how we satisfy customers, but, all the things that were wrong and everything that was unfair and my boss doesn't love me and the hierarchy don't know what they're doing and all of this sort of stuff. And it is exhausting. It's not easy to break away from it in the business environment. So in 3 simple steps, in the first step, I've included about 12 different scenarios where it's not possible to get away or break that connection, and how you can sort of protect yourself mentally. And all of those techniques I found also in these wonderful stories of self-made men and women.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation that you described the negative emotions and that constantly running tape within a person's head of self-talk as being in quicksand. That's a wonderful analogy of how a person feels, because, as you say, the more you struggle, the deeper you sink.
Yeah, it is. It's an analogy I like to use, but the other thing about quicksand is that you usually have a lot of people in there with you. People oftentimes, I think, just feel more comfortable in the quicksand because they're so used to being there, and they don't realize that there's a better way or a way out. Or what Oprah Winfrey once said, "I knew there was a better way, I just had to find it." And I always felt the same way. I could see that I could see where my life was heading if I didn't change. And so I first of all decided I wanted to change. That's an important moment. And then secondly, I committed to change. That's also a critical thing to do, and that's in step 2 of 3 simple steps. And then a funny thing happened, so then I started to get out of this quicksand. My life improved. Miracles seemed to turn up almost every day. I mean, I was in heavy debt. I was in a job I didn't like. At the time, I didn't have a relationship, and all of those things changed in my life very quickly from following these 3 simple steps. So I was ecstatic. But what I wasn't expecting was that as I got out of the quicksand and looked behind me, there's thousands of other people there in the quicksand who are really angry that I have decided to think that I'm better than them, which I didn't, but that's their interpretation, and I've decided to get out of their comfort zone. And it's hard enough to change and be outside your own comfort zone, but I think it's 10 times harder to be outside everybody else's comfort zone. And that's a challenge that 3 simple steps tries to help people with, how to get out of the quicksand and then avoid all that guilt throwing and guilt catching and not get pulled straight back in. And it's a key part of moving forward.
Yes, that happens to many people as they attempt to move out of difficult circumstances, to move out of bad neighborhoods through education. Of course, their attempts to gain more education are ridiculed and sabotaged. Their attempts to get a better job are somehow sabotaged. If they try to start a business, people will tell them they will fail. It's like they're trying to pull you back into that quicksand, even as you found yourself a rope to get out.
Well, and that's the thing. I never had anybody other than my wife and in earlier days my mother who would encourage me. Everybody else, including my father and my siblings, were considered me to be too big for my britches, too self-assured, or got my head in the clouds. It's a very British thing too to think, come on, you're English, tone it down a bit. It's kind of the way people think. And the funny thing happened. I had great ambitions to join the Royal Navy Academy, and everybody, this is when I was 16, everybody told me it was impossible because I came from a class of society that had never been admitted to this elitist institution. But I was determined to do it, and my mother believed in me, and between us we managed to make it happen. It's a story that's in the book, and it's a great story. And the funny thing was, when I had finally had my application accepted and I was sort of on the way to achieving this, what other people called a miracle, I went to my careers teacher at school, and she saw all this paperwork, and she could barely contain her smile. And then she said, I think you should, here's an application form. I think the ideal place for you would be an apprentice in a chicken packing factory, which is just down the road. And if I hadn't had the lesson that my mother taught me, because when she was diagnosed with cancer, she was given 6 months to live, and she just simply, I was there when she said to the doctors, I'm sorry, that's not long enough. I'm not dying until my children are grown and left the nest, and she meant it. And I saw that unshakable belief. That's the first time in my life I saw what the sort of unshakable belief that I had read about in these historical heroes. I saw it for myself in my real life hero. And it's only because of that I was able to resist that tremendous pull back into the quicksand that career teacher could have caused in that moment. So 3 Simple Steps tries to arm you to protect yourself from all of that. A lot of it's well-meaning. It's not that people are malicious. They just don't want you to make a fool of yourself. They worry about, okay, what if it doesn't go well? How will I comfort him? How will I pick him up? So people mostly do it from a sense of wanting to take care of you. But when you let it inside your mentality, it can destroy your dreams very quickly.
You, of course, lay out 3 simple steps, which many books of this type usually amount to more like 36 not exactly simple steps. But the first of your 3 simple steps is reclaiming your mentality. What do you mean by that?
I mean getting back to find the pioneering spirit with which everyone was born, but most of us live a life where that becomes suppressed. And it becomes suppressed because of all the noise we allow into our brains around us. It's, I'd say, nigh on impossible to become self-made if the decisions you make for yourself are based on the opinions of other people or the media or the economy or any of those things. You really have to have complete faith in your own intuition, because oftentimes the brilliant idea you have that can make a difference is counterintuitive to the way the world works. It would be like, who could have, 35 years ago, I could have gone to my family or to a board of directors or to some investors and said, I've had this great idea that I'll open a coffee shop, and people will line up around the block to have a milky coffee and paid $3.50 for it. Well, in its time, people would have laughed in my face for that suggestion, and no one would have invested in it. Now everybody does it as part of the culture. But the person who had that idea, and I know that idea evolved, but the person who had that original concept was going counter to the general population's opinion. And it seemed crazy at the time and was a huge success. My own companies are the same example, in that I started America's first and only 100% virtual pharmaceutical company, and everybody told me that was absolutely crazy. Well, because I had now got control of my mentality, I didn't let that dilute my feeling or my sense of unshakable belief for that idea, even though it seemed crazy to everybody else. And so step 1 is all about finding back inside yourself that individualism that you had when you were born, because when you look at all the historical heroes, none of them were common. None of them looked alike. They weren't like twins. I mean, Henry Ford was such an individual, pioneering spirit. Samuel Colt was a pioneer. Madam C.J. Walker was one of my favorite historical heroes. America's first ever female millionaire, born to slaves, African American, orphaned at 14, married at 15, beaten up and abused by 18 and escaped with a life, just barely. Everything that could possibly go against you went against this woman in a time when, first, women were not supposed to be in business. Secondly, African Americans weren't allowed to have any job unless it was agricultural. And thirdly, of course, she's come from a situation of abuse and negativity, and she became the first female millionaire in America. I think that is amazing, and that's because she was able to hold on to the thing that made her special, her pioneering spirit, which was Madam C.J. Walker. There would be no two Madam C.J. Walkers in the world, just as the same as there's no two Waynes and there's no two Trevor Blakes in the world. But a lot of people become sort of a mishmash of the noise around them and lose that sense of individuality. And I think it's so important to get back to that first before you start to embark on, taking control of your destiny.
When a person masters their own mentality and shuts out the noise that arrives by the television news, the newspaper, every people that they work with and even live with will be pushed aside, and you can live a life based on that premise of your own as being a master of your own mentality, right?
Well, you can, and you don't miss out, because what you're shutting out is not the information or the facts, but the sensationalism and emotions that go with them. I haven't taken a newspaper subscription in 20 years, and I never watch a news program, not even the BBC, because I know a lot of it is propaganda and bias, and I prefer to find out my own version. I prefer to, to trawl around for information and then come to my own conclusion. Whether it's right or wrong, it'll be my conclusion, and that's important. And people, when I tell people this, they find that hard to believe because they, have to get their 10 o'clock dose of Fox News or something like that, or America's Most Wanted, or whatever nonsense it might be that they're letting into their head that's damaging their brain cells. But the funny thing is, when people hear all this, they say to me, well, you can't be very well informed then, and yet I seem to be as well informed as I ever was. I don't seem to have missed out or lost out on anything during this period where I haven't needed to take on other people's, media emotion, if you like. So I think the key is not to try and become, like a saint and put on a purple kaftan and sit on a pointy rock on the top of the Himalayas. It's not like that at all. It's just, as I point out in 3 simple steps, it's making really small changes makes a huge difference in outcome. So right now, if you are fixated with getting up in the morning and switching on the TV and watching a car chase, then maybe all you have to do is just make a small change to that. Do something else first. Do something positive first before you do that, or put the volume down while you're having breakfast or something. It's really tiny changes, and the picture I like to use in teaching these steps is think of a game of pool, and you imagine the beautiful table set up with the rack of balls down the far end and the white cue ball, and you're about to line up the cue against the white cue ball. At that point in time, this table exists for no reason except just to be a table with some inert balls on it. And you can hit the white cue ball, and it can go shooting off the table. If you make the tiniest change in angle, and it could be a fraction of a degree, then the ball goes and smashes the rack all over the table. That's a very satisfying feeling. And I feel it's the same in life, that you don't have to become like Mother Teresa. You just have to make tiny little changes in key moments. I mean, I screw up as much as anybody does. If you were with me when I was watching soccer on TV, which is my favorite sport, you'd think I'd never even read 3 simple steps, let alone written them. We all have those moments where we like to vent and let go, but that's fine. But in critical situations, it's getting that control. So, if I'm going out to a lending officer to start a new business, and the first thing I do that morning is put the TV on and listen to the devastatingly gloomy news, because that's the only thing that they will put on. They're not going to tell you the world is fine and everything's doing well, and you know what, you don't need to watch TV anymore, go and have a nice day. They want you to watch the adverts, the commercials, and so they're going to tell you something that's terrible. When you come back, here's a devastating story. Well, if you do that before you go and see a lending officer, you're certainly not going to present in a confident manner, and you're certainly not going to enter that room feeling like you can get a loan, because you've just heard that nobody's lending money anymore. And you see and hear this sort of thing all the time. So you have to be selective. Think about where you are in life and where you want to go, and only let into your brain those things that can support that dream, and keep out of your brain all of those things that can destroy that dream.
The second step of the 3 simple steps you describe as creating winning ideas. What are winning ideas?
It's a moment of insight that separates the successful from the mediocre, and it's always that one moment that you slap yourself on the forehead and say, why didn't I think of this 20 years ago? And I noticed in the autobiographies of all of these great historical heroes that they all had a way of getting far from the madding crowd and finding a few moments a day of peace where they did nothing except just sit in a chair and think, and contemplate, and do nothing. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And that's where they all claimed, Einstein claimed that's where he got E = mc². He was taking what he used to call these quick naps, but he would just basically sit in a chair. And he'd been pondering this puzzle for over 10 years. He'd thought of nothing else for 10 years. And the answer came to him when he wasn't thinking about it. And so that's really how you get these brilliant ideas. Most people have an experience where they're in the shower thinking of nothing, they've stopped worrying for 5 minutes, and suddenly they get a great idea. And that's what this is all about. So it's finding a way, and the technique I use recommend in step 2 is called taking quiet time, because I want to separate it from anything esoteric. This is not an ancient meditation technique or anything like that. This is pure science. This is how the brain works. So most people think if you take 20 minutes in the morning before you do anything else, that you're slowing the brain down. But actually you're not. That's the only time during your waking hours that you will allow your brain to work at its full capacity, because the brain works almost at the speed of light. And what we tend to do is we jump out of bed and then we go to our text or our emails. And in order to get your thumbs, my little fat thumbs, to work on this tiny little keyboard that's on my iPhone, I have to really slow my brain down to an almost crawling pace, and the brain doesn't like to work slowly. And that does a lot of damage to your brain, but it also dampens down that amazing creativity. So my recommendation is, and I get this from all the people that we mentioned before, because they all did the same thing. Henry Ford used to go out to the farm where he grew up and just sit in a rickety rocking chair, and that's where all of his great ideas came from. Samuel Colt used to weed a 2-acre patch of grass next to his house. All these people found a way to just separate themselves from the madness and the noise and just let their brain do whatever the brain does without trying to help it, without trying to stop it, without even trying anything. Just let it go and see what happens. And, I've been teaching this for a long time, and I get more emails from all over the world about this second step than any other. And what's interesting is instead of an email saying, hey, I really like the book, or, I'm enjoying Control of My Mentality, they write 2 or 3 pages of an email of all of the amazing things that have come into their head as a result of doing quiet time. And if you do it long enough, I do 20 minutes a day, first thing in the morning. It's the first thing I do. I get up and I sort of stretch, and I'm awake, and I watch the sun come up, and then I'll sit quietly for 20 minutes, and that's it. I couldn't imagine my life without it. And all of my successful companies, I've had 4, all of those ideas have come as a result of this technique.
You describe it in the book as a matter of stillness. That's a nice way of putting it.
And that's exactly what it is. Because it's impossible. I think a lot of people who recommend these, and you come across a lot of self-help books where they recommend something similar. I'm a big fan of Paulo Coelho, who also describes the exact same technique in his latest novel called The Aleph. A lot of people think that it's trying to find silence, and that's impossible because there's the hum of electricity around, there's the air, you can hear the blood in the veins and the arteries through your ears, and you can hear your own breathing. So it's impossible to get silence, and people fight against that, and I think that's where people struggle to take this quiet time sometimes. It's just a case of sitting, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I managed to make it into about 10 pages in the book, but basically it's sitting in a chair for 20 minutes in the morning and doing nothing, and it's wonderful because it's 1.38% of your day just for you, and that might be the only time during the day where it's just you and nothing. And it's absolutely it's like eating the finest food or drinking the best wine, or it's a magical thing. And the funny thing is, again, I screw up like everybody else does. I had to get up at 4:30 this morning for a radio show, so I didn't do my quiet time until afterwards, and it wasn't as effective. And this afternoon, my wife turned around to me and said, "Did you do your quiet time this morning?" And I said, "Yeah, but a bit late." She said, "I thought so. I could tell something's not quite right." So she can tell in my demeanor the days I have cheated, and I find that quite remarkable.
I'd often thought in the workplace that something like a half hour of meditation or sitting and thinking or doing nothing but creating ideas might be a way to achieve breakthroughs, but not too many people have ever agreed with that one.
There are a few companies that have it as part of their culture. You're not forced to do it, but I mean, Google has a big. I'm up in Seattle right now, so one of the main Google offices is up here, obviously, and I play soccer with a couple of their folks, and they have a big meditation suite where you're allowed to take time out during the day. The challenge I have with that is that you have to understand that everything in life is energy. That's the number one believing point, if you like, and it can be proved scientifically by string theory that everything in the world, whether it's the gravity that holds you into your chair or the pen you've got in your hand or whatever it is made up of strings of vibrating energy. So that means that thoughts are also energy, a form of energy. And the problem with taking quiet time with other people around you is that they have thoughts and you have thoughts, and they're both energy. And when energies collide, they cause interference, and interference can be constructive or destructive. And that's the only choice energy has. Unfortunately, for energy to be constructive, in that, if you get two people together, maybe 2 and 2 makes 5, the only way it can be constructive is if the thoughts are absolutely identical. In other words, if the energy is the same amplitude and power and frequency. Now, unfortunately, thoughts are like fingerprints. No two people have the same thoughts at the same time in the same way. And so I highly recommend that when you take quiet time, you do it alone. You can't have anyone else in the room because you can't control their thoughts. And their thoughts might be well-meaning, but they're going to interfere with your own. And what you want is your brain to do whatever your brain wants to do. It knows what to do. It knows what you need. And so you want to let your brain just have 20 minutes to do its thing before you slow it down and introduce it to all of these other competing energies.
And during the quiet time and the creation of winning ideas, you mentioned that in the book about creating moments of insight. So what do you mean by creating a moment of insight?
Well, it's that brilliant breakthrough thought that changes everything and just gets you so excited and so fired up, so much so that you are almost running around to try and do something about this great thought. You don't want to lose it. It's so fantastic. And, they can happen any time, but they happen as a result of taking quiet time. And my favorite recollection is walking through Minneapolis Airport, and I had time to kill. And I like Minneapolis Airport because it's got a nice shopping area, and it's not a bad place if you have to do some layover time. And I was doing some window shopping, and then I decided to go to the lounge, and I was at the foot of the escalator, and I had this brilliant idea. And it wasn't just, that would be a good company. It was the full business model. It was everything, almost like someone had handed me a 5 or 6 page document. And that's what I call a moment of insight. It's not just, that's a good idea, why don't I try that? It's the whole thing is given to you like a blueprint. And this is what fascinated me about some of these autobiographies I was reading. They didn't just, Henry Ford didn't just think, I'll make a car. He came up with a blueprint of a car, because cars were luxury items. He was in business with Cadillac and other people, the fellow that started Cadillac, and they had this big argument because they just wanted the idea was to just make luxury vehicles for the rich people, and he wanted a car that everybody could buy, and he had the full blueprint of how you could do that, how you could manufacture it cheaply enough, how you could get the materials. It all came to him in a flash. Theory of relativity, how complicated is that? That came to Einstein in a nanosecond, and that's a moment of insight. And I can't put myself on the same footing as any of those fantastic people, but I was very pleased to be able to come up with a unique company, not just an idea of, hey, I've got a new company and I'd like to call it X. It was the whole blueprint of how this company could stop the corporate wastefulness, reduce drug prices, give free product to patients that couldn't afford it. It was a really good business plan. And of course, then everybody told me it was impossible, but we ended up proving that it isn't.
And, of course, the moment of insight doesn't have to be, as you say, something that's completely world revolutionary, but can be something that changes the individual's own world.
It can, and I got an absolutely delightful email about a week ago. It's one of my favorite emails, actually. It was a gentleman. First of all, he started off with a complaint because he'd got home and I think it was one of the couriers had left a sticky note on his door saying they tried to deliver a parcel and he wasn't available. So he grumpily said, now I had to go to the local office, which is difficult to find places to park around there to pick up my parcel. So then I pick up my parcel and I get home and I find it's wrapped. It's so difficult. I had trouble getting into it. This was his second complaint. And then he said, and I opened up the parcel and it's a self-help book and I can't stand self-help books. That was his third complaint. Anyway, for some reason he flicked through it and he said, it started to resonate with me, and I sat down and I read it in one sitting. I think it's a fairly straightforward book. You can read it in a couple of flight segments or in one sitting at home, a couple of hours, 3 hours maybe. And he said something struck with him, and he has changed the way he perceives his world. And so now he's not getting as angry about some of the things that used to make him angry. And he's had this brilliant idea, so he's taking quiet time. He says, I've had a brilliant idea, and it's a new project. And it was a very simple project. But what made this special to me was in his last line as he's signing off, he said, oh, by the way, his name is Leland, so my name is Leland, and I'm ex-professor of economics at University of Virginia, and I'm 88 years old. So here's a guy who had a moment of insight at 88 years old, and he's been rejuvenated, and he's starting a new project. And I thought that was priceless, and that's what it's all about. It doesn't have to be changing the world. It just has to be changing your world.
Well, that's right. And in fact, many times a person will say, well, why did you do what it was that you did? You didn't really change the world by helping that one person. And I always pointed out, well, perhaps it didn't change the world for everyone, but it changed the world for that person.
Absolutely. It makes a difference. That's my company mission, vision, values for all of my companies has been the same. And it is make a positive difference in people's lives, have fun doing it, and enjoy the material rewards of that success, because the material rewards always follow that sense of purpose. And it's making the positive difference that gives you the thrill, that makes it all worthwhile. For me, it was just being able to, in one example, get medicine to a 7-year-old girl who would be dead today if she hadn't got the medicine, because she was in another country and the government refused to pay for it, and we were able to come up with a way of getting it through the complicated administrative situation so that she could actually get her drug. We did it by creating a clinical trial of one person. So we set up a clinical trial of which she was the only candidate, and she got the drug for free through the trial. And that gave me as much thrill, I think, than anything else in that company. Fantastic that it sold for $105 million when it got too big for me, but if it didn't, that would have been what it was all about.
You changed the world for that girl. To her, now the world is an entirely different place. It
is, and she's actually very sick. She was in hospital half her life, so 3.5 of her 7 years she was in hospital, and she was amazing. She was failure to thrive is how they call it in medical terms. So she was very small and very thin, and she'd been given her last rites. And just by chance, a physician that I had met over here in America looked at her chart and asked, have you tried to diagnose for X? And they hadn't, and they did, and they found the answer, and we got a drug within 48 hours, and she was out of hospital, and now she's a professional ballerina. And that's a remarkable story. Yeah?
That's an amazing transformation of changing the world, and not only has she changed the world for herself, but all of the people that she comes in contact with through her dance.
Exactly.
The third of the 3 steps you call transforming the ideas into achievements. What do you mean by that premise?
Well, I attempt to take everything that anyone's ever read about goal setting and throw it out of the window, because most self-help books talk about goal setting, and they base it on a philosophy that existed over 200 years ago when the basic laws of physics weren't known by anybody. And unfortunately, that the concept was it was a very male-dominated world. The warrior-like mentality exists, whereby in order to get something that you want, you have to, in a way, become an actor in an Indiana Jones adventure where you step over all the bodies of the people that haven't made it, and then you overcome all of these amazingly challenging tasks, and you just make it to find the treasure that wasn't yours to begin with, and you steal it and take it home. Well, nature doesn't work that way. Nature is effortless. It doesn't have to conquer or steal anybody or anything. It exists, and it exists in accordance to laws of energy and laws of physics. And I believe success is the same way. And so we talk in step 3 about intentions and the difference between intentions and a goal. An intention is a goal with all doubt about its attainment removed. And so we work on the way to get to that. I call that a sense of knowing. So it's a way to get to that sense of knowing. And the purpose of step 3 is to find the recipe for success. So you've got your great idea, you've got control of your mentality, and how do you turn that into reality? And you do it by getting the right balance between the warrior-like mentality and the intuitive mentality. And in order to be successful, of course, you need to have the skills to hunt and gather. That goes without saying. But you also need the intuition to sense danger and to notice opportunity. And most people live their lives according to one or the other. They're either warrior-like or they're too intuitive. And it's about getting that balance, about getting more toward a 50-50 balance between, the doing and the intuition. And all of my greatest decisions have been intuitive. So step 3, if you're more of a warrior-like mentality, I used to be a bit of a road warrior, sales guy myself, and, it helps you build up your intuition. If you're more intuitive, it helps you show how to turn that great sort of power into being able to see something you like and bring it towards you. And so it's a very different attitude to goal setting as it's been taught for centuries, really. And it's very effective. What the overall summary of it is, it makes you feel a bit like a little wizard. It makes you feel that you can come up with any idea and you can develop that sense of knowing, and there's some techniques on how you do that. And you know that you and this idea or you and this thing are going to get connected. And it's very powerful and it's incredibly exciting. You start off with some everyone has a dream. Most people start off with really small dreams because they're starting from a position that they're not happy in. But you realize very quickly that you're dreaming very small and you can go huge. And that's how you go from starting a company with a few $100s and selling it for $100 million. Because during that 6-year process, it was only 6 years from beginning to end, there was not one time when I doubted it, because I had developed this way of building my emotion through desire, through belief, to a sense of knowing.
And for people who tend to be more extremely on the warrior side, or those who tend to be more extremely on the intuitive side, the idea of blending and balancing the two is something that would not likely have ever occurred to them at all, because it's almost completely outside of their own nature.
Yeah, one way to think about it is, imagine that you're hungry and you'd do anything for a loaf of bread right now. And the warrior-like mentality will put his armor on and take his sword, and he'll go to the nearest castle, and he'll break through the castle wall. He'll batter down the doors of the bakery, and he'll steal a loaf of bread, or she will steal a loaf of bread. And the intuitive mentality is, well, you know what? I'll put some flour and some butter in a bowl, and I'll bake it up, and I'll put it in the oven, and hey, presto, I've got my own bread. And they're both correct, but it's a case of getting that balance right is what you need to be successful in business.
What you'd be doing with your bread is perhaps making some and adding some from the outside, right?
Right. I mean, it's a key thing to understand that abundance is not finite. There's I think something like 1,000 times more money in the world today than there was even 20 years ago. So life is about creating and creativity. It's not one cake and you're just taking a bigger slice from somebody else. It's not thievery or greed. It's simply being creative. It's creating more, and the more you create, the more you build, the more abundance there is. It's a process of continuous expansion, and that's really how the world exists. We're expanding all the time. The universe is expanding all the time, and so should we be as spirits and people within that world.
That's right in tune with my thinking when people talk about creating internet business, and I would point out, well, you freely offer assistance to others and help them, because there's more than enough business on the internet for millions of people, let alone just the two of us.
Well, and I think that's one of the fantastic things about the era we live in, because even a sole proprietor is now a global company. So you can sit in your home office. I've never leased an office. I've always worked from home. Actually, I've never had an employee either. That's perhaps another topic for another time. But you can sit in your home office, and the whole world is your customer now. And what an amazing time to live. There are no limits.
That's right. The mom and pop business is right there on the internet, one click away from the multi-billion-dollar corporation, both offering the same product, but the mom and pop's business is right there with them as a global business too, as you say.
Yeah, I think it's hard to tell them apart now. That can also be an issue when it comes to the internet, because you can make anything look great, but But I've run my companies from home, and like I say, never had an employee, never had an office lease, or wasted money on those things, because you don't need to these days. I mean, everything's available at the click of a mouse, and I do get frustrated. I do some. You mentioned before life coaching. It's really CEO coaching that I do, and I do get frustrated when people take up or start a new company, or they become a CEO for the first time, and the first thing they do is hire a bunch of people. They hire a CFO, and they hire an IT guy, and they hire a marketing and a human resources guy. And I hold my hands up and say, because 50% of companies disappear every 5 years, and of those 70% disappear because of cash flow mismanagement. Well, you start off mismanaging cash flow by hiring all of these functional experts that you no longer need, because one, you can do it all yourself, and I can show you how to do that, and two, you have access to all of those services and experts on an as-needed basis at the click of a mouse. And it's just I think we're seeing a paradigm shift in the way that companies are being run. In order to be successful as a company today, you have to. It's basically adapt or die, because technology can put you out of business overnight. And the traditional business model is not suitable for that kind of environment, because it takes so long to get a bunch of executives around the table and all to come to consensus, when probably the consensus is the wrong decision anyway. So, we live in a world where you can work from your home office and be as effective as any major corporation without ever hiring anybody or having to surround yourself with what used to be called the mastermind principle, and it's something that I regale against on a regular basis.
The concept that you had for a virtual pharmacy was a disruptive innovation that disrupted the brick and mortar concept of the pharmacy. And for people that are seeking business ideas and who utilize your 3 steps and find those insights and breakthroughs, they're very likely to come up with something very disruptive of existing business models as well.
Yeah, and that's goes back to one of your previous questions, Wayne, and that is what a moment of insight is. And moments of insight typically do change the way the herd, if you like, or the crowd think. Who could imagine we'd all been working on tablets right now? I mean, I remember seeing tablets on Star Trek, the first Star Trek, way back in the late 60s, early 70s, and thinking it was so far in the future that that's probably ridiculous, and yet we all live with them now. So, that's what moments of insight do. And the fellow who came up with that moment of insight also took his quiet time every single morning.
You describe a concept in the book that you call knowing. What do you mean by knowing?
It's that, I've been lucky enough to be married to my wife for 30 years, and sometimes she will tell me something as if it's fact. And, I've learned, I've been with her long enough to know now that when a woman makes up her mind, it's a foolish man who thinks he can change that, because women just have this sense of knowing sometimes. They just know, and it's very strong, very powerful, and it's often connected to their family environment. They just know something about their child, or they know something about a neighbor, or someone can walk through the door and they can sum up that person instantly and not be wrong. And and I think falsely in our world today, we associate that sense of knowing as woman's intuition and assume that only women have it and men don't. And what I like to get to is to show men that, you don't have to get to, you'll never get intuition as strong as a woman's intuition. But if you get 10%, the world's your oyster. And I say to women, you've lived in a world that doesn't put value on that sense of knowing, and treats it almost as if it's a parlor trick. Most women have an incredible advantage over men in the workplace, but just don't realize it, because they don't either trust their intuition, or they work in an environment where men disregard that intuition. And so I don't like to use the word women's intuition, because I don't want it to be associated just with women. I want to use the sense of knowing, because it's available to everybody. And my wife has an incredible intuition, and if I could, bottle 10% of it, I'd be a multi-billionaire overnight. I've been able to bottle a little bit of it in my own life, and I know when I decide I want something, I know I'm going to get it. And it takes a while to build that up, and so there's some techniques and steps, 3 or 3 simple steps, that show you how to build to that level.
And so the state of knowing can be developed and created and put into action by anyone?
Yeah, absolutely anybody. I get a lot of emails about this too, particularly from men who say, this made all the difference in the business environment. They ignored that gnawing in their stomach, that they used to ignore that, and now they pay attention to it, and it makes all the difference because you need to get that balance between the hunting skills and the intuitive skills, and when you can, if you can use your intuitive skills without having to put yourself in danger, what a wonderful gift that is! What a wonderful tool to have.
Yes, we'll very often hear of that in the hiring process, where the person hired will fit all of the boxes that are checked for all of the qualifications and so on that are required, but the person will have that little feeling in their stomach that maybe this isn't the right person for us, but they hire them anyway based on the qualifications and let go and miss the person that may not fill in all of the check boxes, but for some reason they have that feeling that maybe they were the right person, but instead they let the, as you would call it, the warrior mode of thinking dictate their choice.
Right, and unless you have confidence in your intuition, then that's always going to be the process that you go through. And so 3 Simple Steps aims to help build up that confidence, and I think that's a really important part of the process. I had a great example in my own life when I brought on 2 partners once. And my wife had met neither of them. They both worked for me in a previous life. And my wife had met neither of them. And with one of them, she said, that's bad news. You shouldn't go into business with him. And I laughed at her because I said, well, you never met him. You don't know anything about him. And I think my ego got in the way because, he buttered me up. He made me feel like the best boss in the world. And he played that game really well, and I fell for it. And you know what? So I went against my wife's intuition and hired him anyway, and I tried my hardest to make it work out so that I didn't have to suffer that moment where she gets the opportunity to say, I told you so. But about 18 months later, she got that opportunity because it was a disaster. And it was a big relief when that person decided to cash in their chips, if you like. I mean, made profit on the investment, but thank goodness he left the company because he was dragging us down. And I've only gone against my wife's intuition twice, and that was one of them.
So your life lesson there is to listen to your wife's intuition whenever she puts it forward, right?
Absolutely.
How can a person live a life of intention so that the 3 simple steps becomes part of their way of being?
Well, it's like anything else. You have to, because the brain works like a muscle. We talked earlier on about it, hardwires and the more you expose it to something, the more it becomes like that. It's the same in reverse. So if you begin to, in small ways, take control of your mentality, and then you take your 20 minutes in the morning, every morning, or even 15 minutes or 10 minutes, it doesn't matter as long as you let your brain do what it does, and then you start to work on intentions. Eventually, for me, it could be a week before it becomes a habit. For someone else, a month, and for someone else, it can be instantly a habit. Once it becomes a habit, then it becomes a way of life, such that you don't have to think about it or talk about it anymore. And that was the odd thing about writing this book. Talking about these things makes them seem so much more complicated because these are things I do every day. And so when I wrote my first draft, it was only about 60 pages long because it felt self-evident to me. And then, I tested it with a few people, and they said, well, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? And that's how it became what it is today. I had to expand on all of these ideas because it becomes a habit. Once it becomes a habit, it's like having a magic wand, except the magic wand is inside your head. And so you can be like Harry Potter, if you like, and you can say, I'm going to do that. And that's it. That's all you have to do. Because you're living in a way and thinking in a way that will make that happen. You don't have to jump on one foot. You don't have to, stand on the summit of Mount Everest to get the message. You just have to make these very, very small changes, and then you'll see all kinds of incredible things change in your life. And once you start to see those things turn up, you no longer need any more proof. Everybody wants proof these days, but when I was reading the autobiographies of all of these fantastic people, why do I need proof? If it worked for Samuel Colt, if it worked for Emerson, if it worked for Einstein, who am I to say it's not going to work for me? And I do try to tell people that, look, I've had no advantage in life, and yet here I am. if I can do it, everyone can do it. But people don't like to hear that because it sounds a little corny, but it's actually true. And I hope 3 Simple Steps is that magic wand that people are looking for.
So when someone gets up tomorrow morning, what's the first step they should take toward regaining control of their own life?
Well, don't start with step 2 because what will happen is you might just have a great idea, and then you'll go downstairs and your spouse will be yelling at you for being late to breakfast, and the kids will be crying or fighting, and you've got to take the dog out, and your next door neighbor meets you outside and says, oh, have you seen the latest news? The stock market crashed this morning, and that idea is crushed. So you've got to start with step 1. So tomorrow, get on step 1. Take a couple of the techniques that are in there. They're very short and simple, and introduce them into your work day or your home day if you're at home, and just enjoy the difference that it makes. And that's all you have to do is just try it and observe the difference. I'm not going to turn around and say, if it doesn't work for you, then don't accept it, because they always work. So I'm 100% confident that if you take this idea, some of those ideas, and you apply them just one day, you'll enjoy the results so much that you'll never think of going back to the old way of thinking or behaving. And do that for a period of time until you feel like you're getting control of your mentality before you move on to step 2.
It reminds me of a story. A friend of mine was pointing out that when he was looking for a job, that he said, quote, "There are no jobs." And I asked him, "Well, how many jobs do you need?" And he said, "Well, 1." And I said, "Well, surely there's one job in the city that will work. You don't need the city to have millions of jobs. You just need to have one job for you." And about a week later, he announced to me that he was employed. So.
Well, and it's the same with with moments of insight. You don't need. It's nice to have 100 moments of insight. You only need one to completely change your life.
And that changed his, because he was completely thinking about all of this big volume of jobs, when in fact he needed to be just focused on one job. And what is next for Trevor Blake?
Right now I've got 2 companies, one that I'm building, one I still own a third of, which is a cancer research and development company. And then I'm writing several books. So I've got this book out, and then I've got my next book is called Virtual Success. Well, that's the title right now. And it is about how to survive long enough in a business to hit a home run, because I do believe that one of the secrets to success is to stay alive, because every industry has a good day and every business has a chance to have its day in the sunshine, but most companies don't survive long enough to enjoy that. So this is about how to build a virtual company along the lines of the companies I've built, which had gross profits of 85% and home-based businesses that brought in 15 to 20 million in revenue a year with that type of profit. These are very successful businesses and very, very attainable. So that's my next book, which will probably come out sometime next year, I think.
And how can we find you on the internet, Trevor?
It's all very easy. So you can get to me through various portals that go from 3simplesteps.com. So it's THREE, simplesteps.com. And if you want a copy of the book, you can read the first chapter. It's available for free online on 3simplesteps.com, and you can get it from anywhere where books are sold. All of my profits go to cancer research and development, so there's actually nothing in it for me. I'm passionate about this message, but I'm also raising money for cancer research and development.
And, of course, you're on all of the social media as well, because I just liked your Facebook page, and I found you on Twitter as well.
Right. I have a blog, so I have a lot of articles. I think I've written about 80 in this last year, and they're mostly business-based articles, little tips on how to make your business a bit more successful, and hopefully they've been useful for people, and also a little bit of a helping hand for 3 Simple Steps, because it's nice to go somewhere where other people are experiencing the same thing that you are, and you can share the same sense of excitement. So you can get to all of those things through that. The social media activity, I write all the content, but I don't actually do it myself. I have somebody else hit the button for me and do that type of thing, because I'm just too busy to do it all. But it's all available there, and there's a lot of great articles.
Well, thanks for taking the time to speak with us tonight, Trevor. It's been fascinating talking about the concepts of 3 Simple Steps.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Wayne. I appreciate the questions, too.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thanks to everyone for tuning into this edition of Blog Business Success here on Blog Talk Radio. And tonight our guest was Trevor Blake. and he's a successful entrepreneur. He's also a coach who coaches CEOs, and he's the author of the very insightful and empowering book, 3 Simple Steps, A Map to Success in Business and Life. And Trevor Blake described how to regain control of your thoughts and of your life to achieve a life of purpose. Thanks again for joining us, Trevor.
And thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. Good night.